Hello everyone, welcome to Zoho Sheet's webinar. I'm Jaya Shankari, the product marketer for Zoho Sheet, and I'll be the host for today's session. So in this session, we'll see how we can create interactive spreadsheets using the various features in Zoho Sheet. Let's get started. This is the agenda for the webinar. So we'll look into a brief introduction about interactive spreadsheets and how helpful they can be. And then we'll look into the features using which you can create interactive spreadsheets in Zoho Sheet. And finally, we jump into a demonstration where I'll be showing you how you can use these features in Zoho Sheet to create an interactive spreadsheet. The interactive features make your spreadsheet more interesting and engaging to work with. At the same time, they also allow you to control the data that is being entered into your spreadsheet. So these are some of the features that we'll be seeing in this webinar. That is checkbox, picklists, data validation, and contextual options for formats. So now we'll jump into the demonstration and I'll show you how we can create an interactive task management spreadsheet using the various features in Zoho Sheet. So this is the spreadsheet I'll be using for today's demonstration. As you can see, we have an incomplete task report that is being listed. So in the first column, we have the empty cells that are supposed to denote the status, that is if the task is completed or if it is still pending. And the second column, we have the various tasks being listed. In the third column, we have the priority for each task, followed by the assigned date, and then the due date on or before which the task has to be completed, and finally the name of the owner who is responsible for the particular task. So now let's see how we can transform this simple task list into an interactive spreadsheet using the various features in Zoho Sheet. So here in the first column, as I said, this column is supposed to denote the status of each task, whether it's still open or if it is completed. So instead of manually writing the status for each task, saying if it is open, closed, or pending, I can add checkboxes in this column to denote it visually. So to add checkboxes, you can simply select the desired range and go to Insert and click on Checkbox. So that will directly insert the checkboxes into the selected range. So now you can simply tick the checkboxes to denote which tasks have been completed. So this gives a very direct and sleek representation of whether the tasks are still pending or completed. Now in the second column, we have already filled the list of tasks. So we'll move on to the third column where we have the priorities being listed. So here you can see I've already filled the priority for 3 tasks, but I still have a lot of cells remaining. So now let's say we have only 3 types of priority that can be given to each task, that is low, high, and medium. So each cell here in this priority column has to have only one of these 3 values, that is low, high, or medium. So, and no matter who is going to work on this task list, I want this column to have consistent values. So for that, I'm going to use picklist here. So using picklist, you can create drop downs in the cell range. So no matter who works on that particular cell range, they can only select a value from that drop down and they cannot enter any other value into that cell. So now to insert a picklist, just select the desired range, go to Insert, and under Picklist, you can click on Create. So that will open up the Picklist dialog. And here you can see that in the selected range, we already have some values entered, such as low and high. And you can see that the Picklist dialog has taken up those values automatically into consideration for the drop-down. So here you can see the values already being written. And you can also enter the custom values you want for the Picklist drop-down. So that will be the third priority I want, that is medium. Apart from giving values for the drop-down, Picklist also has an advantage where you can give predefined formats for each value in the drop-down. For example, here for low, I'm going to pick a text color in green. For high, I'll pick a reddish color and also a fill color because I want the high priorities to be getting the highest attention. And for medium, choose a text color. So now that we have given predefined formats for each value, so when I click on create, these corresponding formats will be applied to the values that are present in the selected range. So here you can see that the picklist has been applied in the selected range. So you can see the predefined formats being shown in the cells that have values already. And you can see a small drop down icon here. So when I try to enter a value here in this cell, that will open up the drop down for me. I can simply select the value I want from the drop down. As you can see, once I inserted the value into the cell, the corresponding format for that particular value got applied automatically. And no other values other than those that are given in the drop-down can be entered into this particular cell range. So this way you can have a controlled data entry process in your spreadsheet. Besides this, Picklist also has another advantage. Let's say you want to change a particular value in the given range. In that case, instead of manually going and changing the value in each cell, you can simply make a change in the picklist dialog, and that value will get updated in all the other cells wherever the value is present in that particular range. So here in this manage picklist dialog, let's say we are going to make a small change to the value which is already present here in this particular range. So just for example, I'm just going to remove some characters from this value medium just to demonstrate how this works. So here you can see that I've removed certain characters from the value medium. So once I click on save here, you can see the change in this cell. So the cell which had the value medium got updated automatically with the changed value. Now I'll just change it back and save. So this way, if you have any changes that have to be done to the drop down values, you can simply update it in the dialog, and that will get updated in all the cells that already have the value too. So now that we have made the priority column more consistent and easy to work with using picklists, we'll move on to the next column, that is the assigned date. So here you can see I've already filled in the dates for this column. There's another feature in Zoho Sheet that makes it easier for you to add dates into your spreadsheet. So if you have a cell with a date format in it, you can simply double click on that cell and that will open up the date picker for you. You can simply choose the desired date from the calendar widget here, and that particular date will get inserted into the cell. So this makes it more easier for you to work with date formats in your spreadsheet. So now coming to the next column where we have the due date, that is the date on or before which each task has to be completed. So now the due date has to be a date that falls after the assigned date, and if the due date falls before the assigned date, that means there's an error in data entry process. So now to check the data that is being entered in this particular column and to validate the dates that are already present, I'm going to use data validation. So I'll just select the range in which I want the data validation to be applied, go to data, and under data validation choose create validation. So that opens up the data validation dialog. So in this dialog, you can see up first we have the cell range in which you want the data validation rule to be applied. So since I've already selected the cell range where I want the rule to be applied, I'll move on to the next option where you can see two drop downs being given for the criteria. So the first drop down gives a list of various data formats. Based on the kind of rule you want to set on the cell range, you can select the format from this drop down, and corresponding to the format that you select in this drop down, the predefined criteria will be displayed in the next drop down here on the right. So here you can set rules such that only values that are between a certain range can be entered in a cell range, or values that are greater than, less than, equal, or even not equal to certain values can be given in the cell range. So here when the criteria is given as between, below the drop downs you can see that there are fields, so you can enter the specific values for the range. So now we'll see the rest of the formats too. The criteria for whole number format is similar to decimal number. So we'll move on to the next format, that is text. So when you are setting a rule for the text format, these are the predefined criteria from which you can choose. So you can set a rule saying that the value that is being entered in a cell range must contain a certain character or a word, or must not contain or even begin or end with a certain character or a word. So next up we have another option called text length. So using this option you can set a predefined number of characters that must be present in that particular cell range. For example, let's say your team is working on a sales report and you have a column called order ID. So let's say your order ID has 5 characters including text and numbers. So in that case, you can set a data validation rule saying that all the values that are entered in that particular column must contain only 5 characters. So if anybody accidentally enters more or less characters in that particular cell range, they'll be notified about it. So this is just an example where you can give a single value. You can also set criteria in such a way that the text length falls between or greater or less than a particular value too. So next up we have the date format. So now let's see the predefined criteria that's being listed for the date format. So here you can see that there's a long list of criteria I can choose from. So I can set a rule such that the date falls between a particular period or after a particular period, or if the date has to fall in this current month, year, etc. But right now, for the use case that I have, the due date must fall after the corresponding assigned date. And you can see that the assigned date differs for each task, that is for each record the date differs. But here if I choose the predefined format here as before, from this drop down, you can see that I have to give a single predefined date for the rule. But here for this use case, I cannot mention one single date because the assigned date differs for each row or each task. So for this use case, I'll be using a formula. So we'll see how we can give a formula as a rule later. So now we'll move on to the next type. So you can see the next type here is list. So this option will create a drop-down list in the selected cell range. So you can simply enter values here in the given field, one after the other, and these values will be shown as drop-down values in the selected cell range. And here on the right, you can also see there's an option for you to choose whether you want to show the particular list in the cell range, or you can even keep it hidden. And also you can choose to show these values in an ascending order for your convenience. So previously we saw how we can make a drop down using picklists, and in that we saw certain advantages like using predefined formats and even making certain changes to the values and getting it auto updated in the cell range. But here in data validation, you cannot set predefined formats, or you cannot auto update changes to values that are already present in the cell range. But in data validation, you can choose the level of restriction for the drop down. You can choose if you want only those values that are present in the drop down to be entered, or you can even choose the other values to be entered with a warning. So now we'll just move on to the next option, that is cell range. So the cell range option is similar to the list option we saw. So this will also create a drop down in the selected cell range, but the difference here is that you can select the source values for the drop down from another cell range or a worksheet. So I'll be showing an example for this option, that is cell range, later. So now we'll move on to the final option, that is formula. So as I mentioned previously, for this particular use case that I have here, I will be using a formula. So here I want each due date to fall after the respective assigned date. So for that, I'm just going to write a very simple formula here. In this field, I'm going to say this particular cell value must be greater than, or it has to fall after this value in this column. So as I select the cell range, you can see that data validation takes those references to be absolute by default. So by absolute, I mean those references will be fixed for all the rows that are present in that particular selected range. But that is not what I want in this particular use case. I want the values to be compared for each row. So for that, I'm going to make the row reference to be relative by simply deleting the $sign here. So now each row values will be taken and compared with corresponding values. So now that we've given the formula, let's look into what else we can do with data validation. So you can see another option below the formula field called ignore blanks. So if you have any blank cells in your selected cell range, you can choose to ignore them. And below that, you can see another option called alerts and help text. On expanding, you can see that there are two options given, that is for the help text and for the alert message. So you can choose if you want to display the help text and the alert message, or you can even uncheck it if you don't want them. And you can also customize the message that is given in the help text and the alert message. So this help text will be displayed when a user tries to enter data into that particular cell range that contains data validation. So now I'm going to change the help text. So this way you can customize the help text based on your data and use case. So no matter who's working on that range, they will know what kind of value they're supposed to enter. And below that, you can see an option for alert message. So as I mentioned before, so for data validation, you can choose the level of restriction you want. That is, if you want the invalid values not to be entered at all, you can use the stop option here that is given by default. But if you want those values to be entered into the cell with a warning so that you can later on check them, you can use the information option here in the drop down too. So now I'll just leave it as stop because I do not want any invalid values to be entered into that range, and click on OK. So now this range has the data validation rule applied on it. So you can see when I select the cell in that range, the help text is being displayed on the right. So now I'll just simply enter a invalid date. So this is a very common typo that many people might do. So instead of 2020, I've written it as 2002. So now let's see what happens when I try to enter this invalid data into the particular cell range. So you can see that a message is being shown saying that the value that is entered in that particular cell range violates the data validation rule that is set. So you can also customize this pop-up message if you want. This way, when somebody accidentally tries to enter wrong data into the cell range, they'll be given an alert. Okay, so now that we have set the validation rule for the due date, Now let's move on to the next column, that is the owner. So here you can see the list of employee names being given who are responsible for each task. Entering names is always tricky, especially when you have a large team. It's difficult to remember the complete name of all the employees, or even the spellings of each name. So now let's see how we can use the data validation to make it more easier and more regulated to enter names in this particular task list. So here I have a worksheet called team. You can see the third worksheet here, and in this worksheet I have the list of all the employees in the team and their contact number listed. So here, since I already have the list of employees being given in a particular worksheet, I can simply use this list as the source range for data validation in my task list sheet. So now let's see how we can do that. So I'll just select the cell range where I want the data validation rule to be applied. And here my criteria will be cell range, because I'm going to choose a source range from which the values for the drop down must be taken. Now you can simply click on this small icon you can see here, and that will open up a pop-up. So this makes it more easier for you to navigate to the source range. So now I'll go to the sheet where I have the source range, and here I'll simply select the range that contains the employee names. So once you're done selecting the desired range, you can simply click on this tick icon here in the pop-up. So here you can see this desired source range has been selected. Now here I'm also going to check the ascending order, because that makes it even more easier and convenient to search for names and enter them. And I'll click on OK. So here you can see that we have applied the data validation rule with a source range from another worksheet. And here when I try to enter a name, you can see that based on the character that I'm entering into the cell, the corresponding values from the drop down will be listed for me. So it makes it easier for me to enter values from the data validation list. So I can simply choose the name here. So this makes the data entry process more consistent, even if more number of people are working on the same sheet. So as you can notice, we already had so many entries in the owner column before we applied the data validation. What if I want to see if there are any inconsistent values that are present before I applied the data validation rule? So for that, you can use the highlight invalid data option. You can either choose that option from the data validation option in the data menu, or you can even go to the view settings here on the right top corner. Here you can see an option called highlight invalid data. So when I choose that, you can see that the invalid data in this sheet are being highlighted with a red border. You can see that this cell is missing the last name of the person, and here this name is not even present in the list. So this way you can check which values are inconsistent or invalid based on the data validation rule applied. So now we saw some features that make data entry more interesting and consistent. So as we saw, the column with checkbox gives a visual indication about which tasks have been completed and which are still pending. Now let's just make one more small change to make it a little more obvious. So I'm going to use conditional formatting here in this data range, just to visually make it more obvious as to which tasks have been completed at a glance. So first up, I'm going to select the range in which I want the conditional format to be applied. And then I'm going to choose formula here, because I'm going to give a custom formula. So in this formula, I'm going to say if this particular value is equal to true. True meaning that if the checkbox is checked, then I want the format to be applied on that range. We have an exclusive webinar video that talks about the conditional formatting options in Zoho Sheet. So if you want to know more about the conditional formatting options, you can check it out using the link in the description. So now that we have given the condition and the format, I'll just click on OK. So you can see that the format we had just set has been applied in those records which have the checkbox checked. So when I simply click on a checkbox here, the corresponding format will be applied here, indicating that that particular task has been completed. So this makes it even more obvious at a glance as to which tasks have been completed. Now let's say you want an even more focused view of the task list that is being listed. So for that you can use the filter option. So in filter you can use an option called named filters, where you can save the filtered views for later use. I'm just going to filter out those tasks that are still open. So here I'll choose false and choose filter. False meaning the checkbox is unchecked. So now this filtered view shows all those tasks that are still pending or not completed. Now I'm just going to save this filtered view with a name. So I'll go to the filter icon and choose name this filter. So now that I've given a name, I'll just click on OK. So once you save a filter, you can simply go to this option called named filters here. So from here, you can simply choose the filtered view you want to see. So now let's say I want to see the completed tasks, and you can see that the filtered view changed accordingly. So this saves you a lot of time. You need not manually choose the filter criteria each time you want to see a particular view. So now I'll just clear the filter. So this makes it easier for you to keep track of all the tasks. You can use this filter even for the other columns such as priority or even the owner. So now that we have the consolidated task list ready, now let's see what other features we can use to create a dashboard like experience. So here on the right, you can see that I have the count of tasks being listed based on the status and the priority. So here for this, I've used the count if formula. So you can see that I've used the defined name or named range that I had created based on the status column that we had in the task list. So here I've mentioned that if the status, that is if the checkbox is not checked, meaning false, that is the task is open, then I want the total count of those tasks to be listed here. And similarly, I've used the formula for the tasks based on priority too. And here I've used the named range called priority, which is based on the priority column we saw in the task list. So this way you can see the total count of tasks based on its status and priority. You can also place this data in a separate worksheet so you can get an idea of the task based on status and priority at a single glance. So now that we have seen how we can create a consolidated task list, let's see how we can create an individual report based on this task list. So in this sheet, you can see that on top, I have a cell where the employee name has to be written, whose report you want to see. And below that, you can see that I have the count of tasks based on the status and the priority. And below those cells, you can see that I have two charts which are currently blank because there is no data currently present in the cell. So I'm just going to apply a data validation here where we can select the source range from the team worksheet. And now I'll choose the source range and I'll click on OK. So now we have the data validation applied in this particular cell. So I can simply choose a name from this particular drop down. So I'm going to choose Rebecca. So once I chose Rebecca, you can see that the formula cells got auto updated and so did the charts below. But you can see I have one cell empty here just to demonstrate the formula that is used here. So for this, I'll be using the count ifs formula. So first I want the owner name to be the value given here, and then I want the status to be false. So you can see that I'm using the named range or the defined names that I had already created. Those tasks that have the owner as Rebecca and those which have the checkbox as unchecked, that is meaning the task is open, will be taken into account for this total count. And similarly, I've used the counters formula based on the priority here. So those tasks with the owner as Rebecca and priority as high will be taken into account for this particular value, and so on. You can also see that once I filled in the formula cells, the charts below also got auto updated. You can simply hover over the chart to see the value in that particular section. And apart from data validation and other features we saw, you can also use formulas and charts to make your spreadsheet more engaging and interesting. So now that we have seen how you can create a consolidated and individual report, we'll move on to the last worksheet here where we had the list of employee names and their contact number. As I mentioned previously, Zoho Sheet's mobile application makes your number formats even more interesting. Now before we move on to the mobile interface, let me just apply the number format for this particular range here. So I'll go to regional and apply phone number because this cell range contains the contact number or the phone number. You can also apply this number format from the mobile application directly. So once I apply the mobile number format, you can see that the format here in the cell range changed. So now I'll move to the mobile application interface and show you how we make these number formats even more interesting on your handy devices. So this is Zoho Sheet's mobile application. So you can see that I've opened the same file using the mobile application on my iPhone. So now in this task list, so the due date column already has the date format applied in its cell range. So now let's see what happens when I place my cell selection on that range that contains the date format. So here you can see that once I placed my cell selection on the cell range containing the date format, you can see a small calendar icon that appears right above the cell selection. So here you can see that small calendar icon on the top of the cell selection. So once you click on that icon, that will open up an option where you can directly open your calendar application in your mobile device. So if you want to set reminders or if you have to make notes about certain tasks, you can directly do that from your spreadsheet using these contextual options. So now I can simply open the calendar app here and I can make my notes, or I can even set reminders for the particular task. So this way you can work with dates more easily on your mobile applications. Now we'll see how we can work with phone number formats in the same spreadsheet. So we had applied the phone number format for this particular range previously. So now when I place my cell selection on this range, you can see that a small icon appears right above the cell selection. So when I click on this icon, you can see two different options appear. So you can choose to either send a text message directly from your mobile device or even add that particular number to your contacts list or even make a call directly. So I'll choose message here. So that will open the text message application in my mobile device. So this way you can contact your clients or your teammates directly from your spreadsheet without having to copy paste values from your spreadsheet to your contact list. So this makes it easier for you to work with number formats in your spreadsheet. So note that these contextual icons will appear only on your mobile application and not in the web application. So similarly, if you have zip codes in your spreadsheet, Zoho Sheet will allow you to open up the map application in your mobile device to locate that particular zip code. So in this webinar, we saw how we can use checkbox, picklists, data validation, conditional formats, formulas, charts, named filters, and even contextual options for number formats in your spreadsheet to make your spreadsheet more interactive and engaging. Do try them out in your spreadsheets and let us know how helpful they were. If you have any questions or if you need any help with these features that we saw in the webinar or any other feature in Zoho Sheet, feel free to drop us an email at support@zohosheet.com and we'll be happy to help you out. Thank you for watching the webinar. If you have any feedback about this video, you can drop them as comments below. You can also watch our previous webinar videos using the link in the description. Thank you.